If you've ever watched a fast bowler steam in or a spinner completely deceive a batter, you know it looks like absolute magic. But what's really happening out there? Well, the reality is a fascinating intersection of physics, human anatomy, and highly specialized techniques that come with immense injury risks. Plus, they're doing all of this while operating under the incredibly watchful eye of strict regulations. So in this explainer, we are going to break down the sheer physical forces and the strict rules that actually govern the cricket bowling action. Okay, let's kick things off with a fact that is, quite honestly, staggering. A 2003 biomechanical study revealed that historically, 99% of bowlers actually straightened their arms during delivery. I mean, think about that. It completely flipped what we thought we knew about the sport and the very definition of a fair delivery. It turns out the idea of a perfectly stiff arm, it's basically a biomechanical myth. So, to understand how that massive revelation changed cricket forever, here is our roadmap for today. We'll cover 1. The anatomy of extreme speed. 2. The mechanics of lumbar injuries. 3. The art of spin. 4. Unconventional bowling outliers. And finally, number 5, the 15-degree regulation. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. Anatomy of extreme speed. Let's look at how the fastest athletes on Earth generate such raw, explosive velocity.
The delivery stride is an absolute masterclass in kinetic sequencing. You're taking a bowler from generating whole-body linear momentum in the run-up, taking that through the back foot contact, straight into the massive braking forces of the front foot, and finally culminating in an explosive ball release. Literally, every single millisecond has to be perfectly synchronized.
Now, this entire process relies on something called the kinetic link principle. Basically, think of the bowler's body exactly like a cracking whip. It systematically transfers massive momentum from the heavier proximal segments, the legs and the trunk, all the way down to the smaller, lighter distal segments ending right at the hand. By rapidly decelerating those large core muscles, the energy just magnifies as it shoots up the chain. It's brilliant.
But it really takes a highly specific formula to unlock that elite pace. When we look at the kinematic predictors, we see that a fast run-up, delayed arm rotation to let the body lead, and significant forward thoracic bending all have a super high impact. But what about the critical variable? It's actually a perfectly straight, braced front knee, acting as a rigid mechanical pivot point. Seriously, next time you watch a match, look for that straight front leg, because that is exactly where maximum speed is unlocked. Section 2, mechanics of lumbar injuries. Because, let's face it, all those extreme ground reaction forces have to go somewhere. To understand why the injury risk is so incredibly high for fast bowlers, we have to talk about the mixed action. This is a highly dangerous misalignment between the hip and shoulder axes during the delivery stride. Imagine a bowler's hips are side-on to the pitch, but their shoulders are facing completely front-on. This creates a really nasty twisting motion called counter-rotation, as they're fighting to realign their body midair. So imagine what happens when a bowler counter-rotates and that braced front leg just slams into the turf. Those immense braking forces, which are actually some of the highest recorded in any sport, are driven straight up the leg and directly into a twisted lower back. That puts extreme torsional shear force on the pars interarticularis, which is a very delicate bridge of bone in the lumbar spine. And unfortunately, that frequently causes devastating stress fractures. These underlying mechanics totally dictate different delivery lengths, too. Just look at the stark contrast between the highly successful bouncer and the notoriously difficult Yorker. To throw Yorker, a bowler is forced to subtly change their wrist angle and trunk orientation right at the very edge of release. It is a terrifyingly precise maneuver to execute when your body is absorbing hundreds of pounds of force. No wonder the success rate drops to just 25%. Moving on to Section 3, the art of spin. We're going to leave raw speed behind for a moment. The biomechanical differences here are absolutely massive. While fast bowling is all about explosive, full-body power, acting a bit like a giant trebuchet, spin bowling is an incredibly precise, delicate action. It's almost entirely about applying torque, using the fine motor control of the wrist and fingers. That's what forces the ball to deviate so sharply off the pitch. A true masterclass in this kind of fine motor control is the famous dusra. It actually turns away from a right-handed batter using a counterclockwise flick. But here's the catch. To pull this off, the bowler has to severely contort their wrist inward, releasing the ball literally off the back of their hand. Because of this drastic bodily contortion, the dusra frequently skirts the very edge of a legal elbow extension, which makes it a highly controversial yet undeniably brilliant delivery. Then you have another remarkable spin variation, the modern carom ball, championed by bowlers like Chandra and Ashwin. Unlike the dusra, the bowler doesn't turn their wrist at all here. Instead, they tuck their middle finger behind the ball and forcefully extend it, flicking the ball exactly like you would a disc in the board game carom. It is so utterly unique that players often have to learn it using a tennis ball at short distances first, just to build up that specific muscle memory. All right, let's look at Section 4. Unconventional bowling outliers. These are the extraordinary athletes who basically throw traditional coaching right out the window. Take Lasith Malinga's revolutionary sling action. His shockingly low arm path, almost level with his shoulder, completely disrupts a batter's visual timing. But delivering a ball at extreme pace from that kind of angle, that requires a totally unique firing sequence in his muscles, not to mention immense core strength just to maintain accuracy at the international level. Then we have Jasprit Bumrah and his incredibly unconventional, stiff-armed loading motion. You see, Bumrah actually possesses a rare physiological trait, joint hyperextension. This allows his elbow to snap 15 to 20 degrees further backward than the average human during his action. Researchers estimate this specific biological anomaly grants him about a 5% pace boost that other bowlers simply cannot physically access. Talk about a built-in advantage. But if you want the absolute extreme, look at Shival Kaushik. He contorts his body almost 180 degrees. I'm not kidding, his head literally turns entirely away from his target at the exact moment he releases the ball. It perfectly proves just how incredibly diverse human biomechanics can be, while still successfully solving a highly complex motor problem. But of course, there are limits to exactly how much you can contort before you break the rules. Which brings us to Section 5, the 15-degree regulation. This single number, 15 degrees, represents the absolute legislative boundary of the sport, the ICC's 15-degree rule. Simply put, if a bowler's elbow straightens by more than 15 degrees from the horizontal point of their delivery swing up to the release, they are officially throwing the ball, not bowling it. Now, this 15-degree threshold wasn't just some random guess by the administrators. Remember that 99% statistic from the very beginning of this explainer? Well, the ICC revised this specific rule because biomechanical research proved a crucial limitation of human biology. It turns out the human eye simply cannot consistently detect an arm straightening if it happens below this exact 15-degree limit. So, how do they enforce it today? If a player is suspected of breaking this law, we don't just rely on an umpire's eyesight anymore. They're actually pulled into an accredited center and subjected to rigorous, state-of-the-art 3D motion analysis, supervised by experts in human movement science. It's a fascinating process that perfectly bridges the gap between sports legislation and cutting-edge science to ensure absolute fairness on the pitch. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about this quote. Technique is not a single fixed state, but a functional solution to a complex motor problem. It beautifully explains why cricket is home to everything from the perfectly braced textbook fast bowler to wildly contorting outliers like Malinga or Bumrah. Every single body is different, and technique is simply the most efficient way for that specific body to solve the puzzle of getting the ball down the pitch. What you should really take away from all of this is that the bowling action is a constant, thrilling battle between physiological extremes and strict regulatory rules. Which leaves us to wonder, as athletes continue to evolve, finding new biomechanical loopholes and pushing their bodies to the absolute edge, will the laws of the game eventually be forced to evolve right along with them? Thank you so much for exploring the mechanics of the pitch with me today.